Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to Diversio UK webinar. But I'm delighted, very grateful for you to joining us, making time to join me, Daniel Fellows, the General Manager of Diversio UK and EU, alongside Laura McGee, our founder and CEO of Diversio, for today's UK webinar, which is UK Financial Services D&I Compliance webinar. For those of you who may be meeting Diversio for the first time, Diversio is a global leader in DEI analytics and compliance solutions, serving organizations in 100 languages across the globe, spanning over 51 countries. Our academically validated platform offers comprehensive D&I measurement, data analytics, strategy, and consulting and training services. With endorsed training programs and industry-leading certifications, you can partner with Diversio to align with global compliance standards and create a culture where inclusion creates lasting impact. During our live and on-demand webinar, the agenda will balance education, practical guidance and engagement, making it highly relevant for UK HR professionals and business leaders. In the session today, we're going to be exploring the following, and we're really looking forward to getting some questions through from you all. The strategies for firms to adopt and repurpose in a constantly changing climate of people and culture, addressing the regulatory push for transparency and accountability, aligning D&I reporting with broader ESG, CRSD and ESRS, that's hard to say, frameworks, and also how they're interlinked, and also leveraging data-driven D&I strategies and AI-enabled compliance. Laura, thank you so much for making the time this morning. I know you had a super busy week of traveling last week, New York, Toronto, London, and Sweden, meeting our clients and partners. Can you maybe just talk about some of the conversations you were having, some of the local nuances and kind of the themes that emanated from your very busy week?
Lovely to be here. Lovely to see everyone. Daniel, thank you for the intro. And do you want to give a little intro of yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm the General Manager of Diversio UK and EU, and probably the rest of the world outside North America. Here to build and develop on the amazing work that you and the team have been doing over the past 6 or 7 years to grow the footprint across the UK and the EU. We're very lucky to work with some incredible partners across many different industries and different verticals as well. So my role and our growing UK and EU team as well is here to support customers across that D&I compliance, analytics, consulting, and training solutions that we offer.
Fabulous. So I thought, look, we have a smaller group today, so I'd love to make it interactive and discussive. To your point, a lot of discussion around compliance globally right now. We're in a really unprecedented moment, I would say. The last I can remember was 2020, and before that, probably, when I started this work 15 years ago, there's a lot of change and a lot of questions. And so the reason that we have been, physically and virtually traveling around the world, speaking to clients and partners, is that there are conflicting obligations, conflicting pressures, conflicting priorities. And so last week we were very lucky. We did an event in London, and then the next day an event in Stockholm. And so really understanding the European view from companies, from individuals, what are they seeing in the DEI landscape? What are they hoping to achieve? And then, of course, back across the Atlantic today, I'm in New York, speaking again to clients and partners. Tomorrow we'll be back in Toronto. So lots of different perspectives. I think what was interesting at the London event, we heard a lot of talk about doubling down. Of course, the big elephant in the room is the President of the United States and I will be kind of blunt, the attack on DEI that's been initiated by the administration, I think absolutely catching the attention of London, but not yet we're seeing affecting behavior. And we're actually seeing that across the pond as well in the US. Most companies that we speak to, certainly all the ones that we work with, they have not actually changed their behavior. They have changed how they talk about DEI and absolutely can't ignore the threat. But we had one client in London who mentioned she had been looking at websites of her American clients, couldn't find a single one that had deleted or removed their DEI website landing page. And so I think a lot of consternation and questions about the US and London, but not a lot of movement and certainly additional compliance.
And Sweden was slightly different, wasn't it? I mean, it was incredibly optimistic, incredibly positive, but I think you alluded to during the event, within the Nordics, this is a way of life. This isn't a strategy, is it?
I wouldn't even call it optimistic. I think it was realistic from their point of view. Of course, we're going to continue doing DEI. And we kept, of course, in North America, it's all about the business case and what are the economic results, the financial results. And what we kept hearing in Sweden, every CEO brought it back to values. And so that was an interesting distinction we're seeing across regions as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, should we jump into the context, the rest of the world, what's coming? Obviously, disclaimer, we'll share the presentation, obviously, with the folks afterwards and link out to the next webinar as well. But I'll hand over to you, Laura.
Fabulous. Let's do it. Okay, so what we thought we could do is walk through the global context that we're seeing around DEI. Again, in my perspective, it's an unprecedented moment. And again, the big force, the big trend that we can't ignore is really emanating initially from the United States. And so 3 things happened when President Trump was elected to office. He issued 2 executive orders and then made remarks at the World Economic Forum. So this was not a complete surprise. It was a surprise, I think, how quickly DEI came under fire. But the first thing he did was issue an executive order ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. And what this executive order did, and I think this is very important to note, is it prohibited federal contractors from illegally discriminating against individuals through DEI programs. So there was concern that this executive order applied across the private sector. That is actually not true. It only applies to companies who sell or supply to the federal government. Second thing he did, very similar, issued a directive across federal agencies. So any agency of the U.S. government is prohibited from implementing or adopting a DEI program. And then finally, I think what really made waves is he issued remarks at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, where he outlined the administration's perspective on DEI, calling them, illegal, immoral, and absolutely these remarks were designed to have a chilling effect, which they absolutely did, signaling that companies could come under, prosecution, or there may be legal action for continuing these programs. This caused, as you can imagine, everyone, I think, on this call likely touches DEI in some way, a lot of concern. Fear was absolutely something that was intended, something that resulted. And so what we did at Diversio is, DEI is a very broad phrase. It can apply to almost any workforce initiative. And so we sat down and we analyzed the administration's remarks, all of the policy positions that it put out, which are, not many when it comes to specificity, but actual challenges against real programs to understand what type of activity or program constitutes DEI or likely constitutes DEI in the eyes of the administration, and what likely doesn't. What are the programs that we on this call probably consider part of our DEI program, but likely would not come under fire or could very defensively be called not, simply a workforce program? And so what we're seeing is a lot of talk around quotas. I think that probably is the number one target of the administration, is any sort of affirmative action feeling program. And then any sort of discussion or training around, white privilege, any guilt-based programming, anything that suggests that individuals are responsible for past systemic racism. What has not come under fire, and absolutely our historic efforts that have been driving business results for decades, are things that drive cultural improvement across a company. And again, a lot of us, absolutely, including at Diversio, would consider programs that improve culture and particularly promote inclusion and belonging. We would consider that DEI, but that is likely not something that will come under fire by the administration. Similarly, employee engagement surveys, including surveys that might look at different experiences by group, very likely fine. Skills building initiatives, education, mentorship programs, things like that, likely fine. And then, of course, anything using data and metrics to identify retention problems, attrition problems, productivity problems, very likely fine.
I think it's worthwhile saying at this point, Laura, this is an incredibly fluid situation and the team is amazing at updating everything. But I think we saw in Maryland on Monday, a court order is actually blocking portions of executive orders limiting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs applying across the entire federal government. So to your point earlier, it's not actually proven, is it? So
yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll come to that in a moment. The thing about, I'm a lawyer by training, I'm also an American. So I think one thing that has been interesting to watch is there are checks and balances in the United States, three branches of government designed to hedge against one another. And we're seeing a lot of the executive orders, which arguably are a legislative prerogative, but have been exercised by the president, are coming under fire by the judicial branch. So I'll come back to that in a moment. I do think what's important to remember is despite all of the commentary by the administration, there remain in the United States several laws, congressionally approved laws, both at the national and the state level, that mandate what we would consider DEI type programming. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for example, continues to mandate demographic data collection and disclosure. Of course, you have states like California, New York, enforcing pay transparency laws, anti-harassment training laws. Workplaces are still mandated and required under the ADA to maintain, discrimination, harassment-free workplace. So there are still a number of proactive laws in place in the U.S. And I think there might have been a slide go missing, but exactly to your point, Daniel, we are seeing that the executive orders are coming under challenge by a number of different bodies. So think state bar associations, think, human rights organizations in the US. There are actually a number of challenges. And to your point, one was successful. The executive order ending restoring merit-based opportunity was partially stayed, which means partially stopped by the courts for being ambiguous and vague. So what we did previously, trying to understand what DEI means, that was identified by the courts as something that's completely unclear and so therefore not enforceable. Great. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I think, as Daniel said, very fluid situation. We maintain, if anybody on this call would like access, we maintain a real-time document that we're updating with any updates around legislative changes, judicial challenges, things like that. What we wanted to do, of course, we work across about 35 countries at Diversio. So our clients, many of whom are multinational, are subject to different regulatory frameworks. And so we've been tracking this over the past 5 or 6 years. I think the amount of activity that I've seen towards DEI is, again, unprecedented. And we're seeing a real divergence. And so at a high level, most progressive nations have adopted policies recently that actively promote DEI, particularly in the workplace. So I'll come back to this in a moment because it's relevant for this call, but the European Union, of course, with the CSRD and within CSRD, the ESRS, which is workplace reporting, very rigorous and comprehensive reporting framework that will apply to most companies within the next 3 to 5 years. A little bit, to the right of that, of course, we have the Nordics, where, as we mentioned, this really has been in some ways a way of life. New Zealand, Argentina even comes as a bit of a surprise to some folks. The United Kingdom, of course, we'll talk more about that today, and then Canada. Again, a comprehensive framework, often at both the federal and the regional level, mandating DEI disclosure. A little bit further to the left, you've got Italy and Turkey. There's some prohibitive measures, particularly around LGBTQ identity and rights at risk. And then, of course, all the way to the right, you have places like, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. This is a little bit cheeky, but that is where the United States falls in this spectrum. So the act of prohibiting DEI, again, that is an unusual, from what we would consider our peer group, an unusual move. On the flip side, left side of the spectrum, many of you are probably aware of the EU directive on CSRD. And so we wanted to outline high level what the ESRS mandates. And of course, we consider most of our UK clients do business in the EU, and this does apply broadly across companies that do business in the European Union. So it's things like, workforce D&I reporting, work-life balance, health, safety, and well-being, employee engagement, training and career development. Currently, and again, very fluid situation, currently the reporting framework requires both quantitative and qualitative disclosure. So numbers, representation, et cetera, as well as, what are you doing to promote positive working conditions? There have been proposals to reduce the comprehensiveness of this framework, and focus more on the quantitative reporting criteria. So that's something, again, it's fluid. Nothing has been passed, nothing has been changed. So at the moment, this framework remains in place. But again, we're keeping a close eye on it. And this is not without teeth. And so what we're seeing, within the EU, countries are required to enact their own laws when it comes to directives, and with it, their own penalties. And we're seeing that some countries are being very aggressive about the failure to disclose and report. And so we're seeing fines of up to 10 million euro, for example. So those add up quick, but I think really a demonstration of commitment. Daniel, do you want to add maybe a word or two on additional UK specific laws? I know we've been tracking a number around anti-harassment and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we've got a lot more, I suppose you would call it progressive laws that have been brought in when the Labour government came into power last year as well. We've got new legislation, which is an amendment to the 2010 Equality Act coming in on April the 24th as well, which is going to, it's caused a lot of challenges, particularly for SMBs in the UK as well. But it gives a lot more safeguards to employees on the first day of employment as well, and a lot more employee rights, which you would expect to get over a more longer period of time. The UK, and to your point previously, Laura, the EU is much more grounded in legal framework in terms of the responsibilities, the guidance we have to adhere to within the UK and also European law as well. So while the situation obviously is a lot more fluid in America and also Canada, we do have a lot more consistent legislation in place, not only to put a moat around DEI, also people and culture as well, but we're really looking to expand and develop on it. Both of us have been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion for, coming to 15 years. It's massively matured over this period of time. It's baked into the majority of companies, whether you're a 10-person company or a 100,000-person company as well. It's part of your sales, part of your marketing, part of your HR, your talent attraction, your leadership team, every single part of the business. So D&I very much is embedded across companies, and each individual part of those companies are now starting to enable, enact, facilitate different parts of people and culture, whether it is around D&I and analytics, whether it is around training, also around consultation, but really and genuinely and also intentionally really investing in their people to make sure that not only are employees excelling and accelerating within their workplace, but also from a mental health, from also well-being, from an absenteeism and presenteeism as well, that they're making sure that the employees are much more thought of in terms of the workplace. And as I say, that's much more backed within the EU and the UK. And to your point, some of the key regulations in the EU, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directives, really focus on the Equal Treatment Directives, so a series of directives prohibiting discrimination based on race, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation in the workplace. Also looking at the Gender Pay Gap Transparency Directive, which we spoke quite a lot about the Nordics. So it applies to companies with more than 100 employees, so requiring pay transparency assessments, public gender pay gap disclosure and justifications, and also things like the EU Whistleblower Protection Directive as well. So I think much more consistent on these shores, although things clearly are changing. We've got some more compliance elements coming in just after the government amendment announcement on April the 26th, and I'm sure we'll be covering that in some of the blogs and thought leadership pieces we'll be delivering later this quarter.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been interesting, and Danny, you've been in it with me, different countries and different cultures take different approaches to progress on DEI. And there are some countries that are very government-led and very, start with legal authority. And there are others that are socially led. The US, for example, has moments of massive leaps forward, often triggered by a social event, provoking a lot of outrage or concern. Other places like the Nordics, for example, it was more embedded in the legal framework. And so industry followed. The UK is interesting. It's kind of in the middle. And so we see there are bedrock laws in place. So I think the pay gap reporting is a big one. I think the Equality Act that set the legal standard, but especially in financial services, there's a lot of industry-backed efforts that are not maybe legally mandated, but absolutely expected. So when we think about helping our clients with compliance, it's not simply looking at what is the bare minimum legal requirement that we have. It's also, who do we want to be in the industry? What kind of employees do we want to attract? What kind of customers do we want to serve? And so other efforts, I think, absolutely worth noting. You've got limited partners have come together through ILPA to sign basically a diversity in action charter. Very, very active group. We spoke to them. We co-authored a report with them just last week. You, of course, have not quite finalized yet, but we contributed to it. The FCA has taken steps towards a more comprehensive D&I reporting standard. And so this one where we contributed is also focusing on inclusion, which we think is critical. So a lot, I think, for the industry in the UK to think through.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Laura. Also, specifically industries or verticals that have always had a low representation across the business. And to your point around financial services as well, we're pretty lucky to not just invest in Leadership Network that we're part of as well, but a lot of our private equity and finance clients, they are going above and beyond any legislation to increase representation across their own workforces around gender specifically, but also about race, religion, and also sexual orientation as well. So yeah, it doesn't have to be law to make a difference and to actually to over-index in terms of what you're trying to do around your people and culture.
Exactly. So maybe bringing it back. So again, the million-dollar question, and I know it's poor practice to try and predict the future, but we sat down and thought, given what we're seeing, given what we know about all of the governments that we work with, what's coming? What do companies want to be prepared for? And so I mentioned this briefly, but in the US, a lot of judicial scrutiny around executive orders prohibiting or limiting DEI. And what we predicted early on, and we are seeing so far come to pass, is partly right, partly wrong, that companies won't completely retreat, but they will reposition. And so what we saw very early, literally at Davos, is companies saying, CEOs saying, you know what, maybe we need different terminology. If the acronym DEI is inflammatory, let's not distract from the message, let's not distract from the content. So if we need to use words like people and culture, talent and belonging, let's do that. And so our hypothesis was that would be the prevailing trend. I will say very happily, we were wrong on that point. And the number of companies that have decided to double down rather than reposition, reinforce diversity and inclusion as a value is more than we expected. But again, it's a live situation. And so a little bit of background there or more information. We've been tracking, everybody reads the news, I'm sure, Financial Times, Bloomberg, MSNBC, Fox News, and it seems like every other day, at least to my mom, there's another company that has rolled back DEI, canceled DEI. And those are big headlines. That's concerning, certainly to diverse employees and those of us who care about this issue. But what we did is we sat down and we said, okay, let's look at the actual statement. Let's look at the actual position, the actual comments by the company and their CEO. What are they really doing? And so what we've discovered, again, we've been tracking almost everyone that we could find, major brand that has hit the news. And what we're finding is like the group of companies that are truly reversing is very small. So the group of companies that are truly canceling DEI, completely deprioritized, they are concentrated in certain regions and certain industries. So think John Deere, Harley Davidson, Tractor Supply Company. Those that have, I think, made the biggest splash in the news, the brands that we know like Meta, Google, Amazon, it's very much a rebranding exercise. And so what we did is, a bit of a research effort to look at the statements. All of the companies in the yellow bucket absolutely reinforce the importance of things like inclusion, like belonging. And so this, it reads to me like an effort to get rid of the acronym, avoid the risk of some sort of provoking the government, but keep the meat of the programs. And then again, the group that has surprised me in a good way are those on the left. So the green bucket, those that have decided to stay the course, took one for the team, went out publicly, said, hey, this is important to our business. We're talent driven. An alumni of McKinsey, and we got an alumni email recently emphasizing that diversity is the strength of a consulting business, which I thought went without saying, but, helpful to reiterate. JP Morgan, of course, Jamie Dimon right away run out and said, we've built one of the most profitable banks in the world on the back of a diversity and inclusion program. We're not backing away. It's a matter of results. Cisco, of course, Ben and Jerry, Salesforce. And so we are absolutely seeing a bit of a backlash to the backlash. And I think, Daniel, when you did your BBC podcast, I quote this all the time, but the podcast host asked you, a bit facetiously, why are we letting politicians dictate business decisions? And so I think we're seeing a number of CEOs say, look, this is part of our strategy. We can't back away. It's my job.
Yeah, I think I tried to not facetiously respond to his pointed question. But yeah, Nova Nordisk, the folks over in Denmark, they've got 73,000 employees globally. They've got a market capitalization of 570 billion as of April 24th. It marks them out to be the most valuable company in Europe, and it's larger than the entire economy of Europe. When I was chatting to Suzanne, who's their Vice President of Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, she was quoting their CEO, Lars, who said that the values around D&I, they permeate the entire business. He said, our fundamental outlook as an innovation-based company is that a company becomes strong from diversity. The ability to include everyone defines our competitiveness. We have the approach that all employees should be able to meet and be themselves and contribute with what they have to contribute. We're an inclusive company for people who come from diverse backgrounds. That has always been the core of it, and that will always be the core of it, which I thought was quite incredible and quite inspirational.
Yeah. So it's interesting, I think, and this came up in London last week, Daniel, you'll recall. Absolutely, there are companies that will say, look, this is part of either it's a core value that we hold and we don't even know who we are without it, or we're actually going to build a reputation as being the outliers and the people who fight back on behalf of this particular thing. And so that absolutely works for some companies and some CEOs. There are also a big group of companies that maybe do business with the federal government in the US or, are not looking to be a headline, not looking to come under fire and want to be a bit more maybe measured or a little bit more risk averse when it comes to adapting their program. They don't want to lose the benefits, to your point, of innovation, of revenue growth, of profitability, retention, like the list goes on, how, of course, DEI can support a company. They don't want to lose that. That's a matter of business results. That's what their paycheck and their shareholders are relying on. And so what can they do to mitigate the risk? And this is a risk equation, a question of how do we, I like to say there is no risk-free option right now, but how do you find the best results while maintaining the benefits? And so the way that we've been working with our clients, absolutely, is number one, it is a moment for an audit. And so, particularly if you have customers in different regions, employees in different regions, as I mentioned, you have conflicting obligations, even within the same country, you may have conflicting obligations. And so it is a moment to understand, what do we have to do? What are we expected to do? What do we want to do? What's the right answer? So for most companies, at least the ones that are dialing into this call, if completely walking away is not in question, there are two options. Option one is that you stay the course, you double down. Option two is that you refocus and rebrand. Option one, staying the course, it really is reinforcing, and we see this absolutely as a moment of opportunity. This is a great opportunity, and this came up in London, to preserve the programs that are working, get rid of the programs that are performative, maybe even divisive within the company that are not generating results. But on the stay the course option, reinforce the commitment, articulate the business case, make sure it's rock solid. Everybody understands why DI is important, not because it's fluffy, not because it feels good, but because it's important to the company's bottom line. Building alignment around stakeholders. So you need to make sure that the board is on board, the executive team, and most importantly, employees. And then using data to demonstrate those returns. That's something I say with humility that we do, I think, quite well, is demonstrating the attrition benefits, demonstrating how you're, reducing legal risk, demonstrating how people are more engaged, more productive. And so that is a moment to really crystallize the program. Again, get rid of what's not working. This is a great opportunity to do that. Option 2, refocus and rebrand. And so again, not so different. You want to focus on the programs that really build culture, really build engagement, build productivity. And then think about how you might shift external messaging. So like we said earlier, things like mentorship, skills development, workforce optimization, data, metrics, tracking, those are matters of business, they make good business sense. So how do we take the meat of the programs and then repackage it, shift the narrative so that it doesn't, again, attract perhaps negative attention? What we're finding, but not that there is a silver bullet in this moment, but we're very pleased to see, again, as we looked at the companies that have allegedly rolled back DEI, that middle bucket, we specifically saw a lot of commentary around inclusion. And so that seems to be the concept that folks are landing on as being somewhat apolitical. It's hard to argue that harassment, for example, is good for business. It's hard to argue that, eliminating bullying or anything like that, or building a culture where people want to come to work and they stay late on their own prerogative and that they work well together, they're cohesive. It's hard to argue that that could be bad in any way. And so a lot of our clients and a lot of companies we're seeing are really orienting around inclusion as the concept du jour. And the good thing about inclusion is that it is compliance friendly. So every framework that we've looked at, including the FCA, is starting to highlight inclusion as, a core part of DEI, which it historically has been, but I think even more so now. And the business benefit here, of course, is performance enhancing. What we've seen in all of the data we've looked at is that if you have diversity without inclusion, it's actually bad for business. So inclusion is the unlock that will help you get results from having a diverse team. So low risk, high reward, and then specifically in Europe, helps you really be compliant. And so what does this mean? I think the question that we set out to solve 7 years ago is inclusion as a concept sounds great, but how do you measure it? Like really tactically, how do you quantify people's feelings at work? And so what we did, we partnered with a couple of universities, actually, including one in the UK, to basically validate what metrics are most indicative of an inclusive culture that drives returns. So not inclusion for its own sake, but the type of inclusion that will drive productivity and engagement. And so what we use as our framework, and we've seen incredible results through, is 6 things. You look at recruiting and hiring. So you have to bring in, of course, the best talent, the best diverse talent through the door. And then once they're there, you need a culture that has fair management. So, removing the bias from feedback and reviews, make sure that everybody has clear performance criteria and they feel that they have that. Inclusive culture, so a place where, opinions are freely shared without fear of reprisal. Workplace safety, critical. That's a workplace free from harassment, so mental, physical, and sexual. Workplace flexibility does not mean necessarily work from home every day or unlimited PTO, but do you provide the latitude and the flexibility that people, particularly caregivers, can balance work and home obligations? And then finally, this is the metric that we find most companies struggle on the most, career development. So do people feel that someone is invested in their growth? Do they feel like they have mentors and sponsors that will help them find opportunities? So I will maybe pass it over to Daniel to maybe share a little bit more about how we can help. And then I think probably plenty of time to open the floor for questions.
Yeah, we've got one that came in about 20 minutes ago. So thank you, Laura. A couple of the questions that have come through, what we'll ask our amazing marketing team to do is to share a couple of the guides around CSRD compliance, also reporting, and how to get ready as well. But to Laura's point, Diversio is that end-to-end suite of solutions that most companies are looking for. instead of working with 2 or 3, 5 or 6 different companies, maybe across different territories as well. Diversio is able to help you around all those elements of D&I compliance, D&I collection, reporting, analysis, most incredible artificial intelligence our engineers have been building for the past 7 years and continue to optimize as well. Looking at surveying, looking at benchmarking from over 20,000 companies across 51 countries, across 56 different verticals as well, to really help you understand where your company sits today in terms of the inclusive culture. Again, as Laura said, an incredibly broad term, which we can define down to 5 to 6 really meaningful, measurable and actionable KPIs. And then if that's not enough, Diversity EDU, a company which we purchased in May of last year, which is now Diversity EDU, has the most incredible training platform where we deliver up to 40 courses globally, either with one of our incredible facilitators in person, or maybe it's a guided webinar you're looking for yourself, your leadership team, maybe managers, directors or employees. And then also we've got an incredible consultancy team that works with companies of all sizes or shapes or verticals or industries as well to really help make those D&I strategies meaningful, actionable, and to help people navigate what probably more than the last 15 years is it's a very challenging time for lots of individuals and companies, but luckily the Diversio team is here to support you across all of those different challenges that you have across all of your workplace and your people and culture challenges. Let's dive into one of the early questions that we had. Gerard, thank you. How does a merit-based workplace hurt a person of colour who works in a predominantly person of colour environment? Yeah, I mean, that we don't have a necessarily 100% correct, right answer, because there probably isn't one, but a merit-based culture is supposed to reward employees based on skills and performance rather than achievements. And other factors like you alluded to, like race, gender, or background. Although I think we'd all be naive to think that even in a workplace where most employees are people of colour, a strict merit-based system can still create challenges for employees. I won't go into it in depth, just made some notes, but you think about an implicit bias in evaluation. So even a people of colour majority workplace, leadership or management will still have internalized biases of what merit looks like. If merit's judged on Eurocentric or corporate mainstream standards, certain employees might be undervalued despite the contributions. Unequal access to opportunities. Merit's often built over a period of time through mentorship, training, networking. It may not be equally accessible for all. I suppose you've also got an overemphasis on individualized success as well. Pre-existing workplace hierarchies will absolutely exist as well. And then I suppose Laura mentioned it 10 minutes ago, that well-being of your employees, the sort of pressure to work harder for the same recognition. So it's probably more a recalibration of what redefining what merit is. So looking at collaboration, leadership, mentorship, community contributions, looking for bias, uncovering bias, whether it's conscious bias or unconscious bias as well. A sort of 1 hour training for employers will absolutely have no impact on that, but having a sustainable, maybe a curated curriculum of training and educational programs that can continually reinforce and really uncover and really understand and unpack what bias is and how we can work to, you can never eliminate bias completely, but you can work to understand it and to recognize it and be cognizant as well. I hope that sort of answers the first question.
I have a shorter answer. It shouldn't. If you have a truly merit-based culture, it shouldn't matter. I think the issue is that very few workplaces are truly merit-based. And so I think what Daniel was alluding to is a merit-based culture is one where there are no barriers to advancement. And absolutely there are unconscious bias. I feel this as a woman in, rooms full of women. There's still bias towards women from women. And so I think the idea is that should not be a barrier, similar to, racism. It shouldn't be a barrier. So the goal is to get to a merit-based workplace where no matter who you are, you don't face those artificial boundaries. I really like the next question. Gerald, keep them coming. Japan is an interesting case. So I think what we're seeing, one thing that really struck me, at one point we looked at different stock exchanges, because different, institutions were taking action. The Tokyo Stock Exchange does have quite progressive reporting disclosure obligations on listed companies. So I think that was a step forward. They followed NASDAQ. Uh, seeing how we can, as not necessarily a government institution, but certainly a political one, how can we incentivize or encourage reporting? And then I think the other thing that's interesting about Japan, like every country, there are different types of discrimination or exclusion. Japan, what we're seeing a lot of focus on is age, with one of the most inverted hourglasses around an aging population. That's an area that's a matter of necessity. We need to figure out ways to engage and include older employees. Again, it's similar to, I would say, maybe Canada, maybe a little bit slower around setting a legal framework in place, and then that really has been the driving force. And then, of course, culturally, that's been supportive.
Second question. How can firms proactively prepare for the CSRD compliance deadlines, particularly in integrating D&I metrics within broader ESG reporting frameworks? I'll let Laura probably respond to that, but just to note, we'll provide one of our many incredible compliance guides afterwards as well, which will take you a step by step in terms of what you need to do, when you need to do it, and also how you need to do it as well.
Yeah, look, I will plug Diversio. Like, our product team has made it really easy. Really, again, it's twofold. There's quantitative metrics, and then there's qualitative narratives. So the way that we help companies is two very simple questionnaires. One that goes to employees that helps you collect the quantitative data, completely anonymous, GDPR compliant, all that kind of good stuff, protecting the private information. But again, we manage the data collection. And then a second survey questionnaire that goes to typically the HR team and ask them to share in whatever, documents or verbiage they want to about all of their programs. We then use AI to synthesize that information and play it back in a format, in a report that meets the standards and the guidelines. It is something we're finding, particularly the quantitative data around employee identification. Like, that is something that is new for most companies, considering the breadth of data that's being asked to be collected, and not something that most companies feel equipped to do on their own, or, they run into challenges or questions from employees, or, somebody gets offended, or, the Slack channel goes off. So we've really invested in making that a seamless process, explaining and messaging what the data is going to be used for and all that good stuff.
That was going to be my response as well, but we'll also share a guide and obviously my details. Third question, beyond regulatory compliance, and we did speak to this a little bit, how can financial firms ensure that D&I reporting is meaningful and not just a box ticking exercise? I'll point you, and again, we'll include a link in the follow-up email. I did a webinar with Zoe Lockwood, who's Chief People Officer at Oakley Capital, which is a London-based private equity fund. And Zoe was incredibly transparent and forthcoming in terms of how they made it meaningful for their employees, for their organization, how they aligned it into every single part of the business performance, into the risk management, how they actually really prioritize data transparency and quality. They've been working with Diversio for 3 years now as well, and to Laura's point around the data collection. But one of the really specific things that was mentioned is about setting quite ambitious, but also quite personalized targets that were very much tied to individuals' promotion and also individuals' bonus and also performance structure as well. We had a couple of comments in the Stockholm event on Thursday, very similar things. And one of our clients, Kinnevik in Sweden, she spoke about it as well. It's not enough just to actually set meaningless targets. They have to actually be meaningful and actionable. So when you are aligning these sort of ambitious, actionable D&I goals to people's own performance, to people's promotion, potentially as well, advancement in the business, that's an incredible way to really make your D&I strategies impactful, measurable, but also meaningful for everybody involved. And taking it beyond, a box ticking exercise. Um, yeah, they're great questions that we've had. Laura, thank you so much. So you're off to another roundtable in New York at some point today?
I am indeed. I've got to run right after this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for making the time to join us. And thank you, everybody, as well, that's viewing live. And also, we know we had a lot of folks that are viewing this on demand. You can reach me in London. Just wave at me, or maybe you drop me an email or on LinkedIn. And I bid you a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks.